Bravo. L'honorable député de
The honourable member for Regina Capel.
Regina Capel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is truly an honor for me to be able to pay tribute to a great Canadian, a great statesman, a great conservative, a great man, someone who truly lived out his life in service to his fellow Canadian. When I think of Brian Mulroney, I think of a man who led Canada out of a very difficult time. I can't begin to enumerate the challenges that Brian Mulroney was facing when the Canadian people placed their trust in him at an unprecedented level. I mean, the massive majority that he won in 1984 was a testament to his leadership, his charisma, his ability to connect with people, and his ability to show the people of Canada that he was genuinely on their side. And when we think about what he inherited runaway inflation. My parents had to struggle with mortgage payments back in the early 80s. And I remember the stories of the family table where my parents were stressing about how they were going to keep a roof over our heads as interest rates were well into the double digits for many, many years. That was a pain many Canadian families knew all across the country. He inherited a deficit that was out of control with debt costs that were burdening taxpayers and the state. He inherited an economy that over the years had become so choked with government intervention. There were over 60 crown corporations in 1984 when Brian Mulroney became Prime Minister. Canadians might not know this, but at one point in time, the Government of Canada owned gas stations. Petro-Canada, when the previous Liberal government had nationalized and created a crown corporation to manage all the different aspects of the oil and gas sector, including at the retail level. Imagine that, Mr. Speaker. Imagine the Government of Canada running gas stations. Crown corporations had so choked out the productive parts of our economy that Canada was in a very difficult economic situation with minimal growth, with rampant deficits, runaway inflation, interest rates that followed. And what did he do? He implemented a vision of free market economics, unleashing the power of hardworking Canadians. When government gets off their back and out of their way, Brian Mulroney unleashed that on our country and freed our people to do what they do best. And at the end of his tenure, when you look back and you see how he wrestled inflation to the ground, he brought those interest rates down, the dynamic free market, the dynamic private sector flourished and grew, and Canadians rewarded him with a second term in 1988. I truly believe that the mark of a leader who holds office of power, whether it's a premier, a prime minister, or a mayor even, is do your political opponents undo the things that you've done. And we all remember the debates at the time when Brian Mulroney was, for example, when Brian Mulroney was bringing in his vision of free trade. Free trade was such a great example of his leadership ability and his passion and his conviction, because it was terribly unpopular for many, many years and months. But he saw the long-term benefits that would pay off for Canada. He saw that once businesses and people were able to freely trade back and forth with our largest ally and our largest economy and our largest trading partner, that the gains would be massive. And in the 1988 election, every other political party fought him tooth and nail. I mean, this was not just a secondary or small issue that kind of flared up a little bit. This was the seminal question of the 1988 election. And every single vested interest group that knew that they benefited from state protection went to war to confuse Canadians, to undermine the arguments that were being presented, and to try to scare people into voting against the free trade deal and against the Conservative Party. Many a politician would have taken a look at those polling numbers and said, oh, we can't touch this. This is not something that's going to fly. I mean, this is like, campaigning 101. When you sit down with your team and you look at your platform, you look at the polls and you say, okay, well, this might be something we might like to do one day, but the Canadian people just aren't there. We're not going to offer that. We're not going to commit to that. And Brian Mulroney said, forget the polls. It's what our country needs, and it's what will make our country stronger and what will make our country more prosperous. And he fought through it all with the power of his conviction, with his amazing communication style, with that smooth, silky baritone voice. He was able to convince Canadians to place their trust in him once again. And of course, every single successive government has not only promised to keep that free trade deal, but they actually now compete for better free trade deals. Political parties now have to show Canadians how they're going to find more markets for our exports, how they're going to sign new free trade deals with other countries. It's now remarkable to watch when you think back to that 1988 election and look at elections today. He privatized, he denationalized, as I said, over 20, my colleague from Quebec just mentioned this a few moments ago, over 20 crown corporations that were cluttering up the economy. And we all know what happens when governments run things. When governments run things, they don't provide great services at affordable costs. They're not responsive to consumer needs. They're responsive to what works best for the government. And we see this across the board. Imagine living in a country where there were 63 crown corporations and everything from railways to airlines to retail gasoline. And Brian Mulroney helped just declutter that economy. You went to work weeding the garden. I won't be splitting my time, Mr. Speaker. I neglected to mention that to you at the beginning, but thank you for the reminders. So that's what I really do evaluate a former Prime Minister's legacy. For all the opponents who were promising to fight tooth and nail with what his vision was and what his agenda was, have any of them undone what he did? And the answer is largely no. Because he was right. It did make Canada a better place to have free trade deals. It did make Canada a better place to have a more dynamic free market where Canadians were free to do what they do best and be prosperous. And the fact that so much of his legacy is not only intact today, but political parties compete over who will say they will protect that legacy stronger is it's just an amazing testament to Brian Mulroney as a statesman. I want to share just a couple of anecdotes to say what Brian Mulroney was as a human being. To say that he was magnanimous would be an understatement. I mean, he wasn't just charming, because when you give praise sometimes people might think you're just engaging in flattery, or you're just trying to, be nice so that someone reciprocates back to you. With Brian Mulroney, it was genuine. You genuinely felt, whether it was a phone call, or whether you bumped into him at an event, or whether you had the opportunity to sit down and really unpack something. The entire time you were with Brian, you truly felt like you were the most important person in the world at that moment. And he was so quick to compliment, so slow to criticize. His criticism was always constructive, and he was such a booster, not just of the Conservative Party, but of Canada. He wanted Canada to succeed. And we saw this time and time again when political parties of different stripes reached out to him for help on a file, and he always said yes, because he always put his country first, and he always knew that his conservative principles would make his country so much better. He would often call me during my tenure as leader of the party, and I was so thankful that I had that opportunity to tap into that wisdom, to tap into that experience. And every single phone call I had with Brian Mulroney always started off with the subject matter of what he wanted to talk about. He'd say, Andrew, I want to talk to you about something. And he'd say what it was. He said, but before we get there, how's that wonderful wife of yours? How's Jill doing? How's Thomas, Grace, Madeline, Mary, and Henry? He knew all their names. He knew how old they were. He knew what I had told them the last time that I was on the phone with him. If I mentioned that one of my children were playing sports, he'd say, how's that basketball team of theirs going? He genuinely demonstrated that he cared about people on a human level, not just because of the office that they happen to hold. You could tell in everything he did that his guiding lights were his family too. Mila, the rock, the person that he credits with all his success, his wonderful children who have all gone on to be very successful themselves. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Brian Mulroney. Thank you for the service that you've provided for our country. Thank you to Mila and his children. Thank you for putting up with the fact that you had to share your dad, share your husband for so many years with this wonderful country. And very sincerely wish that he rests in peace and that his friends and family are comforted in this difficult time during the public state ceremonies around his funeral. Thank you very much, Brian Mulroney. May you rest in peace.